This is Unit 1, Module 1. Where does bottled water come from? Lesson 2, do we have enough fresh water? In this lesson, we'll discuss why some regions are running out of fresh water, the role of climate change in decreasing freshwater supplies, and some potential solutions. So, are we running out of fresh water? Well, groundwater depletion is a concern in many parts of the United States. Groundwater is being used up widely for homes. So urban and suburban and rural sprawl of taking a massive amounts of groundwater for irrigation, and for livestock it's being used. In this figure, you can see how researchers have measured the change in water levels between 1900 and 2008 of some of the US's largest aquifers in the U. And colors of green and blue indicate an increased water level, while yellow, orange, and reds indicate a decreased water level. So that one in the middle in the heartland by Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, and I think that's New Mexico. Yeah, New Mexico, that we can see it is really decreasing, particularly closer to the south, closer to those arid regions. Now, surface water usage is mainly for power generation, as water from rivers and lakes is used to generate electricity in two main ways, and I talked a little bit about it in the last lesson. Flowing water can spin a turbine and create electricity at a dam or by heating or it can be heated by burning fossil fuels to create the steam that will then spin the turbine. Surface water is also used to cool the steam and condense it back to liquid water. So this is why you will find most power plants, regardless of the type, near a body of water. So if you look here in South Florida, Turkey Point Nuclear Generating Station, it is right next to the bay. And there are these massive 3-mile cooling canals that basically reuse water to cool the nuclear generators. After power generation, irrigation is the second largest use for freshwater use, followed by the public water supply, mainly for drinking, and then industrial uses. Now, why are some of areas of the world struggling with shortages of fresh water? Well, a lot of these regions are deserts, meaning that they already receive very little rainfall each year. And as agriculture in the world almost completely relies on irrigation, aquifers are usually recharged very slowly. Rapidly falling water levels of many aquifers and countries in this desert region are starting to see huge impacts from freshwater shortages. I'm talking about North Africa, the Middle East, which have about 6.3% of the world's population, but only 1.4 of the world's fresh water. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, is seeing the levels of its aquifers drop by a lot of feet per year, and it's estimated that at the current rate of water removal, all fresh water supplies will be depleted within the next 50 years. That is terrifying. And we have that problem here at home as well. The US region, which has the climates most similar to the Middle East, is the Southwest. That is parts of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, and Southern California. These areas have seen a huge depletion of groundwater over the last 100 years. And because of climate change, as well as other weather patterns, there is more and more the lack of rainfall and higher temperatures and high rates of evaporation. So there are few areas with large amounts of water sources the largest being Lake Mead. So if you've ever visited the Grand Canyon or gone to the Hoover Dam, you might have passed by the Lake Mead. And this is what Lake Mead looks like today. You can clearly see the distinction between where water levels used to be, because they're usually that white area that was all covered in water. And now water levels have fallen so drastically, it's exposing all that rock. Lake Mead is actually not a natural lake. It was formed when the Hoover Dam was constructed on the Colorado River. So it is that reservoir I was talking about in the previous lesson. It has not been at its full capacity since 1983, and it's been slowly losing water every year. Um, the reason why it's losing water is from drought conditions and then high amounts of water usage due to increasing population in the region. This area was previously sparsely populated, but now due to increasing home costs on the East Coast and just in the American Southeast, how expensive things are, people are moving out west and starting to build suburban areas out there. During the summer of 2021, the Lake Mead Reservoir was only 35% of its capacity, and the Bureau of Reclamation, which is a federal agency responsible for regulating water usage, declared a water shortage for the first time. This water shortage basically triggered water usage restrictions in 2022 for Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, which had never occurred before. So, what are the impacts of climate change on freshwater availability? I've already started hinting at it. The biggest one is an increase in drought, because there is a decrease in rainfall and an increase in temperature. Less precipitation falling to the ground, and yet higher temperatures on the ground means that evaporation is happening at higher rates. The decrease in moisture in the soil can also decrease plant cover. So remember, the Dust Bowl decrease in moisture affects the soil, allows for plants to, well, it facilitates plant mortality, so they're going to be dying faster. With fewer plants, there's less transpiration in the atmosphere, so there's less water available to form clouds, allowing for that Dust Bowl kind of condition patterns to happen, and it just results in a cycle, like a vicious cycle that increasingly reduces the amount of water available in a region and allowing drought conditions to be more likely. Less precipitation also means less snowfall in colder mountain regions and less snowpack each winter. Melting snow is a source of water to replenish rivers and lakes each spring. So whatever happens at the top of the mountain will definitely influence what happens at the bottom of the mountain. And as I explained, most rivers and streams, they are formed in the mountain tops, and then that snow melt becomes these rivers, which is what happens in the Amazon basin where I used to work. The Andes is the source of the Amazon, and with increased temperatures and less precipitation, less snow melt, less runoff, the rainforest could be significantly harmed. So prolonged drought results in even more groundwater being used for irrigation in places like Arizona and California, reducing the water available in aquifers. In this figure, you can see the average temperatures in the Southwest from 2000 to 2020 versus long-term temperatures. So compared to the historical temperatures, the entire Southwest has seen temperature increases between 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit, which, although you may think is not a lot, these large spreading temperature increase definitely harms conditions all around and ecosystems and biomes. Another impact of climate change on freshwater is the increase in salinity of groundwater. A great example is Bangladesh, which sits on the coast of the Bay of Bengal. Much of the coastal area is within the Ganges River Delta, with many of the waterways running from the ocean to the interior of the country. This results in areas that have freshwater aquifers in close proximity to salt water. As freshwater levels drop in aquifers because more people are using it, there is space for salt water to enter and mix. What does that mean? This water is now unusable if groundwater becomes too salty, and if the water is used for irrigation of crops, it can kill crops, right? Because plants do not want high levels of salt and thus lower yields of crops. Okay, we have this problem in South Florida. Saltwater intrusion is a big problem. As sea levels are rising, we are very close to the coast. The rock that we are on, limestone, is highly permeable, highly porous. And as we extract more and more water through our daily uses and extend more housing down into Homestead, into the Everglades, trying to push, right? More people moving in, more groundwater being used. It allows for that salt water to penetrate into the aquifer and really affect our groundwater supplies. Evaporation can also lead to an accumulation of salt in the soil, and as we talked about, evaporation is going to be increasing with higher temperatures and low precipitation. When water evaporates, it usually leaves the salts in the soil behind, so that's a huge problem. Here you can see the coast of Bangladesh, where most of the region is in the Ganges River Delta. The Ganges is right there on the right side of the screen. If you guys can see my pointer, this is where that fresh water from the Ganges starts mixing with the salt water, increasing the chances for saltwater contamination of wells that might be in this area, saltwater intrusion. In the United States, an increase in salinity and groundwater. So, with increases in precipitation, in most other areas of the country, we are seeing increases in precipitation and more frequent extreme rainfall events, which can cause flooding. This figure shows the rate of change in total annual precipitation in different parts of the U.S. since the early 20th century. Sea level rise from climate change is also increasing the amount of coastal flooding. In many locations, floods are now at least 5 times or more common than they were in the 1950s. This has a negative impact on groundwater, right? As I explained, salt water is now entering into aquifers. With climate change increasing the frequency and intensity of hurricanes, stronger storm surges are expected, which have the potential to push salt water even further inland. Now, what is the impact of limited freshwater availability? Well, we've mentioned a few, and so we're going to go into it further. Decreasing freshwater availability has a range of impacts on the ecosystems. Higher salinity may result in native species becoming extinct or extirpated and replaced by invasive species that can tolerate higher temperatures and salinity. In the Chesapeake Bay region of the Northeast United States, that is happening with the blue catfish, Ectolurus furcatus, which is an invasive species. Researchers have shown that this freshwater fish has a higher salt tolerance than do native species, which may allow it to colonize rivers with brackish. Brackish is basically salt and freshwater mixed, or moderately salty waters. Um, It can also impact terrestrial systems. As rivers dry up, there is less drinking water available for terrestrial species. Waterfowl and other birds also rely on seasonal wetlands, which are becoming scarcer on the planet. And as more wetlands dry up, this reduces the ecological services of these regions, which perform functions like filtering water and removing contaminants. This picture here is of a riverbed that had dried up. And as you can see, several salts have collected. Those are those white little crystals, and several fish have died at this point. Now, of course, you'll have vultures that will scavenge and all that, but the decaying fish usually contain high level of contaminants because the water dried up and left it over, which also should not be consumed by waterfowl and other birds. What are the impacts of limited fresh water availability on human communities are equally as wide-reaching as for natural systems. Fresh water is essential for the crops that produce the food we eat. In the Aral Sea, located in Eastern Europe, this was at one point the fourth largest sea in the world, but the water sources that supplied the sea were diverted to irrigate normally dry areas in Eastern Europe. While this allowed agriculture to grow in these areas, it also resulted in the shrinking of the sea, resulting in a body of water that today is only 10% of its original size. This has led to a loss of drinking water and fishing that fed many families in the region. So, anything that happens in the natural world will definitely impact us in the human world, and this is a great example of that. It is estimated globally that 1 in 4 people do not have access to clean and safe drinking water. There are more than 1 million deaths each year that are attributed to a lack of safe drinking water, and microbial diseases such as cholera are more common in places that lack clean, fresh water where people are forced to drink water. And you can see that here in Africa. They are collecting water from a wetland, but it could be highly contaminated with bacteria such as cholera, dysentery, etc., if not cleaned properly by boiling or putting water purification tablets. There are solutions to freshwater scarcity. The first being desalination because of the high level of salt water that we have on the planet. You can remove the salt from seawater and have a new supply of fresh water. It comes with some significantly challenges. You have to either do distillation or use a membrane that separates water from salt and other minerals found in salt in seawater. In distillation, the water is heated until the steam is produced, which is then condensed back into pure liquid, right? So now you can already tell it's being heated, meaning it's using high amounts of energy, okay? Membrane desalination is similar to a reverse osmosis system in which the pure water is pushed through a small pore filter that traps salts and other minerals. These membrane desalinizations are extremely expensive. This is a desalination plant in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. It's able to take in seawater and produce fresh water that is both used for drinking and irrigation. Desalination is being successfully performed around the world with an estimated 21,000 plants in operation, a majority of them in the Persian Gulf region. Now, why might that be? Well, it's a very expensive process, mainly due to the large amount of energy needed to either heat the water or pump it through filters. The Persian Gulf region is very wealthy due to their high level of petroleum production, so they can't afford this. They have a smaller population, they have a high GDP, they can afford these type of plants. However, a 2013 study estimated that a family of 5 would pay around $2,000 per year for their water for their water to come from desalination, which is about double the normal cost of water from normal methods. Another issue is that what do you do with the salt once it's separated from the water? Sometimes it's added back to the seawater, but that can disrupt the natural balance of the water and it can negatively impact the local ecosystem. And then sometimes it's added to the ground, which yet again will like create an imbalance in the soil and groundwater with such high salt levels. Another solution is water conservation, right? Being more conservative with the use of fresh water that we already have. There are a lot of simple and easy ways for all of us to save water. Turn off water when it's not being used, right? For example, when washing dishes or brushing your teeth. In fact, while brushing your teeth, if you turn off the tap, it can save around 1,000 gallons of water each year. Limiting the amount of time you take a shower or taking showers instead of baths, it will not only reduce your water usage, but your monthly water bill as well. Beginning almost 20 years ago, there were several programs that have been implemented in Las Vegas to bring down water usage, such as homeowners being given rebates if they removed from their yard grasses and other vegetation that required overwatering. Businesses are also incentivized by installing water-saving technologies. And when you add up all these initiatives to a region, it can reduce water usage by almost 47% between 2002 and 2020, even though the population increased by 780,000 people. Water transfers. So in some places, water can be transferred from one source to another. They are often done in the same region, with water being moved from one reservoir to another through a pipeline or aqueduct. California is contemplating the use of more pipelines between water reservoirs as a way to help supply the locations that need the water the most in a given year. And China is currently working on one of the largest water transfers ever attempted, the South to North Water Diversion Project in the Yangtze River. But if you look at the picture, you can notice that air pollution in the image that looks like fog. While most of the population is in northern China, about 80% of China's water is in the less populated south. So this is another solution, yet I don't think it's the best solution. It is very expensive and requires high levels of cost, initial upfront cost. Okay, that's all for this chapter. I will see you guys in the next one.